In May of 1927, pioneering aviator Charles Lindbergh became the first person to fly solo nonstop across the Atlantic Ocean, and the age of aviation seemed to be upon us. Inspired by his flight, wealthy men all over the world started to sponsor long distance air races to help develop the aviation industry and maybe gain some publicity for themselves. The same month that Lindbergh made his flight, pineapple magnate James A. Dole offered the not insubstantial sum of $25,000 to the winner of a race that would fly between Oakland, California and Honolulu, Hawaii. It was a shorter distance than Lindbergh had flown, and he wasn't even asking that you do it solo, and yet it had never been done before, and it turned out to be anything but a Hawaiian breeze. The 1927 Dole Derby deserves to be remembered. On May 25th, just 4 days after Lindbergh had completed his flight, the Associated Press announced in a special edition of the Honolulu Star Bulletin that James Dole, president of the Hawaiian Pineapple Company and a member of the Honolulu chapter of the National Aeronautic Association, had offered prizes totaling $35,000 for the first flyers to make a nonstop cruise by air from the mainland to Hawaii. Dole offered $25,000 for the winner and $10,000 for second place. It was a hefty sum. Lindbergh's custom-built Ryan plane, the Spirit of St. Louis, had cost a total of just $12,500. The Star Advertiser reported that Hawaii's Pineapple King, in offering the prizes, seeks to encourage the development of trans-Pacific aerial transportation. Charles E. Lindbergh's amazing solo dash from New York to Paris without a stop has convinced Dole, it was said, that the day is not distant when Hawaii will be connected with the mainland by air routes, and it is to hasten that day that Dole has offered the $35,000 cash prizes. Dole, at the time traveling to Boston for a conference, said in a cable to the Advertiser, "Until recently, while I had looked upon aviation as an ultimate economic importance, it had taken Lindbergh's conquest of the Atlantic to make me realize that Hawaii, in particular, needs to have the future of aviation brought nearer to the present." In particular, the Pineapple Pontiff postulated, the continued advance in aviation may mean within a few years mail delivered in Honolulu in 20 hours from the mainland. It may mean that in case of emergency, the businessman or visitor can make the journey in a day. Dole was apparently not alone in his sentiment. The Advertiser reported that Dole's action in putting up the prizes brought praise from several of Hawaii's high officials and prominent citizens. Among those, the paper listed Governor Wallace R. Farrington, William C. McGinnigal, president of the Honolulu Chamber of Commerce, Clarence H. Cook, president of the local chapter of the National Aeronautic Association. While details of the contest were not yet clear, the paper reported that Dole in his statement said that he wanted the regulations concerning the flight to be as liberal as possible, as long as they were in consonance with the ordinary rules governing prize airplane flights. But Dole made it clear that safety was a goal. It is natural for all of us in Hawaii, as well as all followers of aviation the world over, to hope that this contest may cost no brave man either life or limb. He hoped to accomplish this by carefully considering the contestants, saying, "Much activity appears to be developing to ensure a good field of properly equipped contestants for a flight this summer. No precaution can be too great to satisfy all who are sincerely interested in the permanent development of aviation." As to that field, Dole did make one desire clear. "I should be glad to see Captain Lindbergh, the man first to make this flight successfully, and to be able to greet him at the Rogers Airport in Honolulu." Rogers Field, which had only been dedicated the previous March, itself demonstrated the difficulty of the task. The field was named after a U.S. Navy officer, Commander John Rogers. In 1925, Rogers had attempted the first nonstop flight to Hawaii, taking off on August 31st with two Navy PN-9 flying boats. One of the planes suffered engine failure after 5 hours and had to land, the crew picked up by a Navy ship. Rogers' plane, which received less than expected tailwinds, made it approximately 365 miles from Oahu before running out of gas. Forced to land in the ocean on September 1st, a navigational error meant that they missed the Navy ship with which they were supposed to rendezvous. And without gasoline, they couldn't generate power for the radio. Low on food and water, the crew used fabric taken from their wing to rig a sail. They were missing for 9 days, the Star Advertiser reporting that the 9 days were a long one for a worried world. Nearly everyone gave up hope. They managed to sail within 15 miles of Hawaii when they were picked up by the submarine USS R-4, which towed them the rest of the way. Although they had failed to fly all the way to Hawaii, they had set a nonstop air distance record for a seaplane and earned enough fame for the new airport to be named in Rogers' honor. Despite the obvious obstacles, even the day after Dole's announcement, several aviators expressed interest. The Star Advertiser reported that 3 planes had already expressed a desire to enter the race. Martin Jensen, a pilot from Honolulu's Lewis Tours, French pilot Louis Blériot Jr., and Clarence Chamberlain of the Columbia Aircraft Corporation. The paper also reported that Commander Richard Byrd, who had famously flown over the North Pole in 1926, was a very probable entrant. While the rules for the race were being established by the National Aeronautic Association, Dole did make an important point. The race would not start until August 15th to give all flyers a chance to prepare. It is arguable whether that was a necessary precaution, but it would, in the end, take some luster off the race. On June 27th, Army Flyers Lieutenants Lester Maitland and Albert Hagenberger took off from Oakland Municipal Airport in a 3-engine Atlantic Fokker C-2. Officially, the flight was to test a new Army directional radio receiver, but the apparatus failed. Still, the two completed the flight to Hawaii's Wheeler Field after a flight of 25 hours, 50 minutes. While they didn't win the Dole Prize, having not waited for the August 15th start and landing at Wheeler Field rather than Rogers Field, both aviators were awarded Distinguished Flying Crosses and the 1927 Mackay Trophy, an Army trophy awarded yearly for the most meritorious flight. The Wisconsin Historical Society notes, although the acclaim given Maitland and Hegenberger for their accomplishment was limited in comparison with the adulation for Lindbergh, whose transatlantic flight had taken place only weeks earlier, their accomplishment was possibly greater from a navigational standpoint. In any case, their trip tarnished the Dole contest at least to some extent. The Oakland Post reported on June 30th that W.M. Stewart, a World War I fighter ace who planned to fly in the Dole contest, complained in a speech before the United States Naval Alumni Association that the $25,000 first-place prize wouldn't cover the cost of the plane in flight, and, quote, was not enough since the Army Flyers already had won the glory of being first. On July 14th, another pair of flyers, Ernie Smith and Emery Bronte, made the trip in a Travel Air 5000 monoplane. The plane ran out of fuel but crash-landed on the Hawaiian island of Molokai, although both aviators were uninjured. Before the Dole Derby could even be run, 2 planes had already made it from the mainland to Hawaii by air. Still, the San Francisco Examiner reported on August 4th that 15 entrants had met the deadline and would be drawing for position to leave from Oakland Municipal Airport on August 16th. Lindbergh and Byrd, of course, were not among them, despite initial hopes for their participation. Among the flyers was a famous stunt pilot, Arthur Goebel, and Navy Lieutenant William Davis, flying another Travel Air 5000 named Woolaroc. Captain William Porter Irwin, a World War I flying ace, who would be taking along his wife Constance as a radio operator, flying the custom-built Dallas Spirit. Former Navy pilot Martin Jensen flying the monoplane Aloha with navigator Paul Schulter, a merchant ship captain. The Buell air sedan, Miss Duran, would be piloted by daredevil flyer John Augie Pedler, at 24 years the youngest pilot in the race, but also would be carrying a passenger, 22-year-old Mildred Doran, a schoolteacher from Flint, Michigan. The Roanoke, Virginia Times reported probably no other person who was included among those in the notable air race is so colorful as this little schoolteacher. She had mentioned an interest in being the first woman to fly across the Pacific at a cocktail party, and her father's boss, W.F. Molosca, president of the Lincoln Petroleum Products Company, had sponsored the flight. Things started to go wrong even before the race began. Navy officers Lieutenants George Walter Daniel Covell and Richard Stokely Wagner were both killed on August 10th when the Pacific Aircraft Company J-30, Spirit of Joe Rogers, crashed into a hill in heavy fog while flying from San Diego to Oakland to begin the race. British flyer Arthur Vickers Rogers was killed on the 11th when his Bryant monoplane named Angel of Los Angeles crashed on takeoff from Montebello, California, headed to Oakland. The race that Dole hoped may cost no brave man either life or limb had already cost 3 lives, and the race hadn't even started. And there were more problems. The Catrone and Fisk CF-10 triplane, piloted by J.L. Giffen and sponsored by movie star Hoot Gibson, crashed into San Francisco Bay. Giffen, navigator Theodore S. Lundgren, and a passenger swam to shore, but the plane was lost. Starting August 11th, the remaining planes and crews faced a series of qualification tests, which proved difficult, including mechanical tests as well as tests of piloting and navigational skills. By the 16th, only 9 aircraft remained in the race. One more, the city of Peoria was disqualified the day of the race, having been determined to have insufficient fuel to make it to Hawaii. Officials at the Department of Commerce expressed concern, seeking to delay the race to allow more preparation or even to have the race run from Hawaii to the mainland instead. Race organizers and contestants refused. The plane struggled to take off when heavily laden with fuel. El Encanto, a Goddard special considered a favorite to win the race, swerved on takeoff, smashing its port wing. The Popco Flyer made it 7,000 feet before crashing. Pilot Livingston Irving made a second attempt to successfully take off, crashing again and putting the plane out of the race. Miss Doran took off fine, only to return almost immediately with engine problems before the others had even finished taking off. After quick repairs, the plane took off a second time. Only 7 of the 9 had managed to take off, and 2 of those, Oklahoma and Dallas Spirit, soon returned with mechanical issues, out of the race. Oklahoma had only made it 30 minutes before they started experiencing tears in the fuselage covering. Only 4 planes were still in the air. Goebel and Grace were the first to arrive at Rogers Field in their plane Woolaroc, greeted by a crowd of an estimated 30,000. It was fortunate in that it was later revealed that Goebel had borrowed money to pay for the plane and needed the prize money to pay it back. Despite their success, their time was 2 hours and 17 minutes slower than the record set by Maitland and Hegenberger in June. Almost 2 hours later, Jensen and Schuler arrived in their plane Aloha, taking the $10,000 second prize. But the 2 remaining planes, Golden Eagle, which had been sponsored by William Randolph Hearst, and the Miss Doran, failed to arrive. The Navy began a search. On August 18th, the Roanoke Times reported that Miss Mildred Doran, pretty Michigan schoolteacher, was floating about the Pacific Ocean on her biplane, was the opinion of the race navigation inspector, Lieutenant Ben H. Wyatt. Dole put up another $10,000 as a reward to anyone who helped recover one of the lost aircraft, while the plane's sponsors also each put up a $10,000 reward. 5 Navy destroyers were dispatched from San Francisco to aid in the search, as well as the aircraft carrier USS Langley and flying boat tender USS Aroostook. All ships in the area and along the route were asked to keep a lookout for flares. Hopes faded as the time passed when either aircraft would certainly have run out of fuel. The Roanoke Times reported that interest in Flint was intense throughout the day and night. Citizens crowded about the newspaper offices awaiting word of Miss Doran, whom they knew as the country schoolteacher and big sister of the smaller children of the Doran family. On the 19th, Dallas Spirit, repaired, set off in search of the missing planes. Dallas Spirit was carrying a radio and made regular check-ins. At 9:02 p.m., the plane radioed an SOS, saying the plane had gone into a tailspin, but recovered. 8 minutes later, there was a second distress call. Although Constant Irwin, who was then pregnant, was not aboard, William was, along with navigator Alvin Eichwald. None of the planes was ever seen again. Only one small piece, a piece of an aileron thought to be from the Dallas Spirit, was ever recovered. Aviation in the early days was simply dangerous, and these long-distance races often resulted in fatalities. Whether they succeeded in their goal of developing the industry or just made the public think that it was more dangerous is still an open question. Ernest Smith, who was the pilot that in July had made it all the way only to crash land in Hawaii, argued that the entire race was a mistake. He said, "This is just stunt flying, not practical for land planes. All for $35,000? It isn't worth it." I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community at Locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop, book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.